For most people, one historic achievement would be enough to define an entire career. For Christina Koch, it was only the beginning. In 2020, she returned to Earth after spending an incredible 328 consecutive days aboard the International Space Station, setting the record for the longest single spaceflight ever completed by a woman. During that mission, she also became part of the first all-female spacewalk in history, proving not only her endurance but her skill as one of NASA's most accomplished astronauts. At the time, it seemed almost impossible to imagine what could come next. She had already secured her place in the history books. But history had one more chapter waiting for her. On April 1st, 2026, Christina Koch climbed aboard NASA's Orion spacecraft as one of the 4 astronauts selected for Artemis II, the first crewed mission of the Artemis program. 9 days later, after traveling hundreds of thousands of miles through deep space and circling the moon, she became the first woman in human history to fly around our closest celestial neighbor. It wasn't simply another mission, it was another moment that changed space exploration forever. To understand why this achievement mattered so much, we have to go back to the beginning of Christina Koch's journey. Long before she became an astronaut, Koch was fascinated by understanding how the world worked. She earned degrees in electrical engineering and physics before beginning a career focused on scientific research in some of Earth's most extreme environments. She spent months working in Antarctica, living in complete isolation during the dark polar winter. She also participated in research missions across remote locations where survival depended on preparation, teamwork, and the ability to solve problems under constant pressure. Those experiences may seem very different from flying in space, but in many ways they were the perfect training ground. Astronauts spend months living in confined environments, isolated from the rest of humanity, relying entirely on their crew and the systems around them. Antarctica offered a glimpse into those challenges long before Koch ever wore a spacesuit. In 2013, she was selected by NASA as part of Astronaut Group 21, one of only a handful of candidates chosen from thousands of applicants. Years of training followed, learning to operate spacecraft systems, practicing underwater spacewalks, training for emergencies, studying robotics, learning Russian, flying high-performance aircraft, preparing for situations most people could barely imagine. Then in March of 2019, Christina Koch launched aboard a Soyuz spacecraft to begin what was originally planned as a standard 6-month mission aboard the International Space Station. But plans changed. NASA decided to extend her stay to nearly 11 months to collect valuable scientific data about the long-term effects of spaceflight on the human body. Every additional day provided researchers with information that would become increasingly important as humanity prepared for missions beyond Earth orbit. Living in space isn't simply floating around and looking out the window. Over time, muscles weaken, bones lose density, vision can change. Body fluids shift toward the head. Even the immune system behaves differently in microgravity. Understanding these effects is essential if astronauts are ever going to travel to Mars or establish long-term bases on the Moon. By remaining aboard the station for 328 consecutive days, Christina Koch helped scientists gather one of the largest collections of long-duration physiological data ever obtained from a female astronaut. Her mission wasn't about breaking records. The record was simply the result of the work. While aboard the station, Koch also completed 6 spacewalks, spending more than 40 hours working outside the spacecraft in the vacuum of space. One of those spacewalks became historic around the world. On October 18, 2019, Christina Koch and Jessica Meir left the International Space Station together, becoming the first all-female team ever to perform a spacewalk. For decades, women had participated in spacewalks alongside male astronauts, but never before had 2 women conducted an entire EVA together. Ironically, the mission had originally been delayed months earlier because NASA simply didn't have enough properly sized spacesuits prepared for 2 women at the same time. By the time Koch and Mayer finally exited the station together, it wasn't treated as a publicity event. It was simply another example of astronauts doing their jobs. But the symbolism was impossible to ignore. Generations of young girls watching around the world saw something that previous generations had never witnessed. When Christina Koch finally landed back on Earth in February 2020, she had spent nearly a year away from home. She held the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman. She had completed 6 spacewalks. She had participated in one of the most iconic moments in modern spaceflight. Most astronauts would have considered that a remarkable career. Instead, Koch was just getting started. While she was returning to normal life, NASA was preparing for something much bigger. For decades after the Apollo program ended in 1972, no human beings traveled beyond low Earth orbit. The moon remained silent. Generation after generation grew up without seeing astronauts venture into deep space. NASA wanted to change that. The Artemis program was created not simply to return astronauts to the moon, but to build a sustainable human presence there, creating the knowledge and technology needed for future missions to Mars. Before astronauts could land on the lunar surface again, NASA first needed to prove that its new spacecraft could safely carry people into deep space. That mission became Artemis II. Unlike the Apollo missions, Artemis II wasn't designed to land. Instead, it would test every major system needed for future exploration. The crew would launch aboard the massive Space Launch System rocket, travel farther from Earth than any humans had in more than 50 years, loop around the moon using a free return trajectory, and safely return home. Every stage of the mission would help validate the Orion spacecraft before astronauts attempted lunar landings in future Artemis missions. When NASA announced the crew, it immediately became clear that history was about to be made once again. Commander Reed Wiseman would lead the mission. Victor Glover would become the first black astronaut to travel beyond low Earth orbit. Jeremy Hansen would become the first Canadian ever assigned to a lunar mission, and Christina Koch would become the first woman ever to fly around the moon. The announcement represented more than diversity for the sake of the headlines. It reflected how much human spaceflight had changed since the Apollo era. During Apollo, every astronaut who traveled to the moon was an American man. More than half a century later, humanity's return would look very different. Years of simulations, engineering reviews, emergency drills, and integrated testing finally led to the morning of April 1st, 2026. Inside Orion, the 4 astronauts strapped into their seats. Outside, the most powerful rocket NASA had built since Saturn V stood ready on the launch pad. As the countdown reached 0, millions of pounds of thrust lifted the Space Launch System into the sky. Within minutes, Orion separated from the rocket and began its journey toward the moon. For the first time since Apollo 17, human beings were once again leaving low Earth orbit. As Earth slowly shrank behind the spacecraft, Christina Koch quietly crossed a boundary that no woman had ever crossed before.